At the same time, we have the weakening of the magnetic field of the planet. We have the increase in volcanic activity. And all it would take would be a couple of volcanoes to blow in a really big way. And boom, we're in an ice age. That's it.
Adapt 2030 Mini Ice Age Conversations covers changes in our climate due to a new and intensifying grand solar minimum. In the media, overlooking, downplaying, or burying cold weather changes occurring on our planet. This is in order to keep the global warming agenda steaming full speed ahead. I do this podcast and radio program because we need to begin conversations on how to adapt our food growing strategies long before 2030 as agricultural zones shift, affecting global crop output. But very few mainstream media outlets are talking about the most important issue of our time: cold weather crop losses. Our sun is going through a 400-year cycle, which has effects on our weather patterns as our magnetosphere weakens and the jet streams go out of flow. It's not CO2, it's not you, it's the sun. Are you ready to thrive in the grand solar minimum? Then join me for Mini Ice Age Conversations. I'm your host, David DuByne.
We suggest that the weakening of the solar activity decrease the electric charge of the ionosphere, which in turn decrease the electrical field in the atmosphere and within the Earth, between the surface of the Earth and the core of the Earth. And this electric field was acting as a binder, holding the constituent of the planet together. And now it's getting loose. And looser means more volcanic eruptions, more seismic activity. Another factor that contributes to this volcanic and seismic activities is the slowing down of the planet. As we have demonstrated in the book, the main cause of the spinning of planets and galaxies and stars is electrical in nature. A drop in solar activity means a drop, minute drop, in rotational speed of the planet Earth. And that slowdown means a slip, because the crust, low density, thin, has way less momentum than the core, the mantle, that is high density, and that is very massive. So during this minute slowdown, the mantle is slowing down slower than the crust. The crust is slowing down faster, and that creates a lot of shearing forces, slippage at the contact points between the bottom of the crust and the top of the mantle.
Yeah, so it's, I think maybe what we're saying here is we have a kind of a gloomier view than just a grand solar minimum. A grand solar minimum is bad enough, but with all the other factors, it's kind of like one of those, what do you call it, the things where you have the three cycles that come together, biorhythms, like the planet has biorhythms and it's going to have a triple bad day.
Yeah, because a lot of people I've been talking to also keep insinuating again and again, where they will not come on the record and say that we are heading into a much heavier, much more powerful cycle that's going to override what is considered a 400-year, grand solar minimum cycle of intensity. And you talk about that dust in the atmosphere back in the late antique little ice age, that 535 AD era. For some reason, the sulfur dioxide hung in the air from Rome to Japan and everywhere in between. And after 3 or 4 years of people breathing this sulfur dioxide, heavy laden air, the plague just even went further and swept even further as people's immune systems decreased. And, if we start to get back into these incredible long, you're talking about galactic crossings times tens of thousands if you're getting back into the 27 million year cycle. That's an incredible amount of time to think about. Just even humans on the planet, it's 21 million years. So when you take a look at that, that even goes back prior, even another cycle than before human existence even started on this planet. And again, when you talk about the cycle of the entire solar system, think about our solar system going around from point A back to point A around the galaxy above and below the ecliptic, 200 million years. So that'd be 10 round trips approximately. Well, 9.
Something like that, yeah.
And this episode's brought to you by TrueLeafMarket.com. Heirloom and organic seeds since 1974. Full range of garden seeds, microgreen seeds, sprouting seeds, wheatgrass, grain seeds, flower seeds, herb seeds, and ground cover crop. I encourage you to take a look at their website, TrueLeafMarket.com, and they even have free starter guides there for you to learn how to grow sprouts, microgreens, herbs, and wheatgrass. Use the link below and give yourself the gift of organic and heirloom seeds.
Just to complicate matters, I mean, it's not complicated enough, right? Just to complicate matters, there's this German scholar, Gunnar Heinsohn, kind of a historical revisionist, but he's well credentialed and he's got the skills to do some of the things he's doing, and he's been going through the history, and he says that there's been 700 years added to our history. So this event you just cited, 536 AD, which interestingly Mike Bailey and Victor Klub talk about to some great extent, was actually 700 years closer to us in time, and that some of the things that they've used for dating, they have these floating dating methods, the floating dendrochronological things that they slide up and down to make the tree rings match. But he says that there's been 700 years inserted to our timeline, and that the 536 event should be 700 years closer. Now, I haven't quite wrapped my head around what he's writing. I'm still looking at it. But if what he's saying is true, we'd really have to look at adjusting some of our timelines considerably. I mean, it's like 700 years? That's a long time to expand a timeline. So what he's proposing, I think, is that the plague of Justinian and the Black Death, the plague of the 14th century, were the same event.
Maybe I would add a few data about the ongoing, actually, solar minimum. There's a lot of speculation of the magnitude of the solar minimum. We don't really know. The worst is probably still to come. You see a lot of graphs paralleling the Dalton minimum and last third solar cycles, 21, 22, and 23. Indeed, it's very similar. So, and Dalton minimum was not such a serious minimum, but we don't know what will happen in the future. We following this trend for now. It doesn't mean that, like in the case of the Dalton minimum, it will be short-lasted. It will last for 3, 4, 5 cycles, and we go back to normal solar activity. We don't know at this point. Maybe it's going to keep decreasing solar activity cycle after cycle. Maybe the sun will be mute for longer than expected. We don't know. And when you check the prediction about solar activity, for example, the predictions made in 2006 about coming years, it was way higher than what reality revealed. It's a bit like this prediction made by this panel of scientists about global warming. And once reality provide data, forecasts keep being revised. And in the end, 2 years, 3 years down the road, the initial predictions are way off the chart. They're not irrelevant. They don't match reality at all. So we might, in store for us, might be a cooling that is way worse than what happened during the Dalton minimum.
And that was bad enough. There's a nice little book that's been published not too long ago. I think it's Sam White. He published a book called A Cold Welcome about the colonial settlement of America, and he dug into the records and extracted eyewitness testimony of what exactly was going on in the Americas during that little ice age, during that period of time, and what the colonists were experiencing and what, of course, they were experiencing at home, which drove them to adventure out to look for something better or different. And some of his descriptions of what the weather was like in the Americas were quite disturbing, because he goes to some extent into the weather patterns, and he points out that most of the east coast of America, contrary to what some people think, is governed by a continental weather pattern, which means that the air moves across the continent to the east coast. And while the weather in Europe is a maritime climate, because the masses of air move across the ocean and then onto the land of Western Europe, Spain, England, Ireland, and so forth. So these two different types of weather mean two different types of reactions of the regions to global cooling. In other words, America, the U.S., especially the East Coast or the eastern half, is pretty much screwed because it's got this continental weather pattern, which is going to be very much colder. There were accounts of freezing weather year after year, and really terrible freezing in Florida, the freezing of the Rio Grande, the freezing in Mexico. There were winters that were so terrible, no crops could be grown at all. One of the reasons for the conflict that grew up in the early days of settlement between the Indians and the colonists was simply lack of food. The colonists needed food, and they asked the Indians to help them. The Indians didn't have the food to share, and they said no, and so they got into a fight over it. And that's really a microcosm of what's happening or going to happen in the not too distant future. The wars over resources.
Yeah, and the bleak with consequences of the severe weather in the US doesn't mean Europe is off the hook. We have to keep in mind that Western Europe has this temperate climate mostly because of the Gulf Stream. At this equal latitude, a city on the west coast of Europe is 10 degrees Celsius warmer than a city on the east coast of the US. 10 degrees. And this 10 degrees is mostly due to this huge calorific conveyor, the Gulf Stream. You stop the Gulf Stream, just other parameters being called, you drop temperature in Western Europe by 10 degrees. 10 degrees, to give you an idea, during last glaciation that ended during the Younger Dryas about 12,000 years ago, during the last ice age, temperature in Western Europe were between 5 and 7 degrees cooler than they are today.
So, what do you think about what we're saying?
Well, I wanted to go back into exactly what you were talking about in Florida. The Native American Seminole Indians had a name for that event, and it occurred for 8 straight years. They called it the Great White Rain, where it snowed in Florida and the Everglades froze enough where they could walk over the ice. And you have to think about that because, yeah, it is incredible. And you have to think if it was that cold there, then how far south did the cold extend? For sure it went down to Cuba. It had to have. And we see these same weather fronts right now, especially just as we speak today and tomorrow through the United States. Another Arctic front is blasting all the way down in through southern Mexico. And as it progresses through the next few days, Cuba is supposed to be 10 to 12 degrees Celsius below normal temperatures. So what you're talking about right here is happening right now because the East Coast Thanksgiving blizzard that just occurred, those temperatures were 30 degrees Fahrenheit below the normal. And that was a regional thing from Baffin Island all the way down through New York, down into the southern part of the United States. And when you take a look at what was happening at the same time over in Asia, Seoul, South Korea, usually their first snowfall is the highest recorded back in, it was like 1989, was around 2.3 centimeters. Well, just the day before yesterday, they had 8.8 centimeters as the earliest first snowfall. So you're starting to see all these other little factors adding up. The Atlantic Multidecadal Oscillation, the AMO, it's going into its natural 60-year cycle of cooling anyway. And all these other things are adding on top. So Europe's going to be cooling. America has its own regional cooling going on. Now Asia is really starting to show some of the same pinpoints of what happened. If you look back at the drought reconstructions, and if you understand that China is going to lose their crop growing areas in the north, specifically in Heilongjiang and the central and Hubei and Hebei, when it gets down to these central areas and China can't grow as much food just because the weather, and Mongolia is taken offline and Kazakhstan goes down a bit and the rest of Europe can't grow as much and Russia can't export as much. We get the same thing that you're talking about with the Native American Indians. Everybody's going to ask for food, but there just won't be enough on the planet. And at that point, what happens? If there's a lot of agitators in the street, hungry people want change. They demand change. Now, if you have hundreds of thousands of hungry people in the street fighting with the police every day, fighting with the army, you're going to want to get rid of those people. But in the real world, you can't just round them up or shoot them and put them in FEMA camps. But if you send them off to a war, to try to go get food for your country for some weird fake reason, lies that they're putting out. This country said this country's doing that. It'd be a way to get all the troublemakers off the streets. And I'll leave it at that.
I think you're right on the money there, and that's the way it's going to play out, I'm afraid. And one little addenda would be that the east coast of the Eurasian landmass, i.e. China, is also in the same position as the east coast of the U.S. It's subject to a continental climate because of the airflow and the weather pattern. So it will be more hard hit than, say, the western part of the continental landmass. So it's really going to be, there's some things you can calculate or you can estimate because you've got some kind of historical standards by which to, judge or evaluate your material. But in other respects, a lot of it's going to be a crapshoot because we keep bringing up here different cycles. There are solar cycles, there are cosmic cycles, there are Atlantic cycles, there are different galactic cycles that are going on, and everything is just kind of like coming together. And meanwhile, out there in human masses land, people are acting under the influence of their psychopathic leaders like complete nincompoop. They're basically bringing it on themselves. And it seems to me that a whole lot of serious suffering is going to have to happen before people wake up and realize how badly they have been misled and how they have bet on the wrong horse and followed the wrong leader. And it's just going to be ugly. I don't see a good outcome unless more people can get the message out, if more people listen to the message. But how do you get a message out when people have been programmed to believe that science, and not just programmed, because it's true, science and religion have lost their moral authority because of corruption. There's corruption in science. My husband is a scientist. He talks all the time about the corruption in science that he witnessed and experienced in his 30-year career as a university professor and physics researcher. It's corrupt. There's and religion. Look at the scandals of the Catholic Church, the scandals of all of the Pentecostal or Protestant churches, the different mega churches where the pastor all of a sudden is exposed for having raped and abused many women in his congregation, and the same thing with the Catholic Church with the homosexual scandals, the priest abusing children. So both science and religion have lost their moral authority, and as a result, the liberal philosophers have come up with the idea that there is no truth, there is no standard. Everything is relative to the individual, and a more egregious use of relativity theory has never been used than in the philosophical milieu. But at this point, so you get out there and you talk about it. I get out there, I talk about it. Pierre talks about it. Other alternative news sites talk about it. And then all these people say, but who are you and what's your authority? And then if you refer to your sources, your historical sources, or your scientific sources, or any other kind of source, then they say, but they're corrupt. They're science. Science is corrupt. Or a religious authority. Oh well, they've been proven to be corrupt. They have just completely lost any anchoring, any mooring. So, what to do? I mean, I'm asking you what to do because I don't know. I don't know what to do. How do you establish a yardstick, a standard for what people should think and believe?
And since I have been talking about our need moving forward in this new society that we're entering as our global grain production starts to be reduced in yield, your food prices are going to skyrocket. And I mean skyrocket, not just doubling or tripling, something like 5 or 10 times higher by 2020 at the very least. TrueLeafMarket.com. I really want to talk about growing your own food, which will be a necessity moving forward. They've been around since 1974, heirloom and organic seeds. Since I've started talking about them in my videos, I have a lot of people write and say that they've previously ordered, that they know the owner, having great results, good customer service. They quite enjoyed the seed quality as well. And there's so many ways that we can go about growing different types of vegetables that we're going to need. Microgreens are incredibly nutritious. They're super fast to grow. In less than a week, you can have something that you can eat. And we know the benefits of microgreens. All you have to do is use a search engine and look up vitamin, mineral, nutrient content of microgreens. You'll be shocked. Also, sprouts. We can get those a little bit taller, a little more dense, a little bit larger volume on the vegetation mass coming off of there. So how do you know what kind of sprouts to grow? How about wheatgrass or herbs? What about different types of herbs that we can add to our foods? Now, what I just described to you, there's a full range of starter guides there at trueleafmarket.com for you to take a look at. Even if it's just for your own knowledge and you don't purchase something from them, at least get the information so you know how to grow microgreens, you know how to grow sprouts, you understand what some of the herbs are for. And not only that, they have wheatgrass and grain seeds. So when I'm talking about grain growing regions going offline, we just need to look back in history and see where across the planet there was difficulty growing grains when this grand solar minimum intensified and the jet stream started wandering just like they're doing today due to a decreased magnetosphere that does not hold our jet streams locked in their traditional flows. Grains are one thing, herb seeds are another, cover crops, something different, but whatever you do, organic seeds are going to be a necessity because you can save those seeds and then grow them the next season, which you unequivocally cannot do with GMO. TrueLeafMarket.com. Use the link below and give yourself the gift of organic and heirloom seeds.
It seems that not only we have killed God, but now we, or at least our postmodern elites, are trying to nominate the individual as the new God, the creator of reality. And this is really a problem from an evolutionary or cosmic perspective, because I believe that life has a purpose, and one of the fundamental purposes is learning, i.e. figuring out reality, i.e. assessing objectively reality. And when individual believes basically the contrary, believe that there is no reality, they deny the very reason why they are here, why creation is here, there are certainly some mechanisms that help reestablish the life principle on the right track of learning, the track of progression towards more complexity, harmony, life. We have lost this track, and I think we're simply facing what we call catastrophes, but from a maybe broader perspective is a very healthy rebalancing mechanism to ensure that the life principle follows its path towards complexity, creation, learning, information.
Yeah, and you talk about the past history being rewritten. If this is a realignment, and this is truly a cosmic energy wave, a cosmic evolution of our species, where this wave is pushing through and really literally separates the two minds of what you're talking about. So if you were going to rewrite history, and Victor's write the history, how do we even know that the history that we've been fed, we've seen, we've been taught is even the true history, that this hasn't already occurred once or twice before, and it's been a split every time? And as we march forward, the persons left on this planet that have not vibrated or not realigned back into the consciousness thought are the ones left in the denser reality. They're writing the history. Because you look through history and you start to nations, they were there 1 minute and they were gone the next. They literally just disappeared. And you could go from the Anasazi to parts of the Maya, the Olmecs, and many places in between. If you want to jump over to some of the more Chinese religions, you're talking about Ho-E, the comets in the skies, and parts of countries have literally disappeared. Entire populations of millions of people have just vanished in an instant. So it really begs the question, can this reality split itself and we really evolve onto a different plane? And maybe it's that time right now, because it seems there's a lot of pointing to this around year 2000-ish. You're talking about 10 years plus or minus 20,000 years. That's a rounding error. But when you get to this time frame right now, there's everything that has been written in almost every belief system across the planet in the last 5,000 years points to right now as some significant change. Perhaps they'd already mapped out when these forced cosmic energy waves come through, and you either split to what you're talking about, a realignment to truth, or you don't.
I agree. I think we are in a time of splitting realities. In fact, I wrote a long series about it at one point. Yeah, it's definitely splitting, and it's governed by certain cosmic laws. And I think we, as some great scientist once said, I think may have been, I don't remember who it was, but he said, we need to find out what this whole show is all about before it's out, you know.
Yeah, and you mentioned, in talking about splitting and the splitting of reality, you mentioned truth. And I think it is a very fundamental constituent of the splitting. In the book, we give example of how the sharing of truth helps individual access truth of a higher order. And let me explain them. There's some very simple example that illustrate this concept. Is, for example, the stereoscopic vision. You see with your two eyes, but each one of your eye see one picture in 2 dimensions. But if both your eyes acquire this data objectively and share this data objectively and openly, then the sharing of the objective 2D picture leads to the emergence of a truth of a higher order, that is a picture in 3 dimensions. And I think this principle can be transferred to larger scale, i.e. individuals, a critical mass of individuals sharing a critical mass of objective information might be able to access a higher order of reality, of truth.
And it would have to be a critical mass, and we don't know what that number is. You know, Gurdjieff said that he thought it was something like 200, and I've heard recently that some other teachings suggest 200 people who could achieve a certain perception of objective truth, sharing their data with one another, and, you know, cross-referencing, you know, could create a seed around which a new reality could aggregate or condense, you know, the way water condenses on a dust particle in the atmosphere. That's one of the possibilities we think about. So we continuously strive to try to get to the point where we ourselves can be as objective as possible with our 2-dimensional view and share it with someone else who has another 2-dimensional view, and then acquire a 3-dimensional view, so to say. But ultimately, you need a larger network to have a hyper-dimensional view of things. And that's what's needed to create the particulate around which a new reality can condense, I think.
Well, this new Grand Solar Minimum is definitely going to be a catalyst across the internet to get hundreds of thousands, if not millions of minds moving in a different direction, looking for different causations. I mean, perhaps this worldwide conscious web that's around us anyway is part of the evolution of the species, if you will. But what's coming, people are going to be looking for more information because there's going to be so many changes that the fear is going to drive people to look for new answers.
I hope.
Yes, at the same time, fear makes people very vulnerable, more vulnerable to wishful thinking, hystericization, manipulations. You see, those we've known those times. Some of those times are quite well documented and not so far away. The French Revolution, which is depicted by the victors, a great triumph of the values of the Enlightenment, right? And reason, and equality, and liberty, and solidarity.
Liberté, égalité, fraternité.
Exactement. The French Revolution is a case in point. The French Revolution occurs at the very beginning of the Dalton minimum. The French Revolution occurs after a carefully engineered bread shortage. There was fear, there was cosmic pressure, there was political pressure. And what did it lead to? Well, the suffering led to hysterization, manipulation that made people embrace or disaccept or close their eyes on even more violence and more oppression. So I hope you're right what I'm saying, that times of crisis, fear, pressure, don't ensure that people will find the right information, objective information, and resonate more on the truth frequency. I'm afraid it's quite the contrary.
Yeah, historically speaking.
I do my channel just because I want people to understand the mechanisms for the change so they don't come at it with fear. So they truly understand why these changes are happening, that they're not coming at it from fear because they know what the outcomes could be and what the next amplifications are going to be. So then they can take steps to protect themselves, to get communities together. And that's the reason. That's the reason I do my channel.
And that's what we hope will work, because, I don't think there was anybody at the time of the French Revolution who was saying, oh, this always happens, because, well, for one thing, they didn't have the internet. I mean, I know that the internet is a great instrument for disinformation and for mind control and manipulation. But you know what? The internet is also probably one of the greatest around the whole planet to get together and to share their observations, their feelings, their resources, whatever. It's both a curse and a blessing. And I think we should work on trying to make it a blessing, because it's given to us for this period of time, and we don't know how long we'll have it, because the powers that be may decide to completely cut it off, and then we're all cut off from one another, and that's a terrible thought. So for the time being, we need to use it and to do as much as we possibly can, to work as hard as we possibly can, because the night is coming.
This video is brought to you by our friends at TrueLeafMarket.com. Heirloom and organic seeds for any grow zone on our planet.